My name's Sally Lowell, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the plenary session on biodiversity and climate change. Before I introduce our speakers, I just want to take a few minutes to tell you a bit about sustainability at the company of Biologists. So, in 2020, we launched our Sustainable Conferencing Initiative. Particular thanks to Kate Story, who was a real driving force in initiating the initiative. And this was motivated by a real need to find new ideas to improve the sustainability of scientific meetings. And if any of you have any ideas, large or small, that you'd like to try and implement in your own meetings, please apply to us for funding. We would like to support you to try experiments in new ways of running conferences. We also share all of your ideas and we share advice through our Sustainable Conferencing website, thanks to the work of our wonderful Sustainability Officer, Theodora. And more recently, we've extended our focus to sustainable labs. And I hope you've seen this really wonderful series of blogs by Jeroen, who's here today, to guide us through all of that. Our meetings team pay a lot of attention to sustainability at our own event, so please have a look on our website to see how they've addressed sustainability at this meeting. And for our financial investments, we choose sustainable and ethical options. And then everyone's favourite bit, from the brilliant brain of Steve Kelly, emerged the forest of biologists. So every paper that you publish in our journals, we will plant a tree. And every paper you review, we will protect part of an ancient woodland. And it is really lovely to be able to virtually visit your tree in our virtual forest online. And it's also actually quite fun to visit other people's trees and click on them and see what papers they're linked to. It's a kind of potluck way of exploring the scientific literature. So, it's a very great pleasure to introduce Professor Hans-Otto Pörtner. Hans is a leading animal physiologist. He's based at the University of Bremen and the Alfred Wenger Institute. He's fascinated by the physiology of marine animals, and his many important contributions to his field include work on the impact of rising temperatures and CO2 levels on sea creatures. And it's this work that led to his involvement with the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, where he's worked for many years. He played a leading role in investigating and reporting on our planet's vulnerability to the changes in our climate. This is, of course, outstandingly important, and I think also an outstandingly challenging task, for which his contributions have been recognised by many medals and awards. So Hans, we're really delighted and honoured that you've made the time to join us here today, and we look forward very much to your talk.
Yeah, good morning, everybody, and thanks a lot for the kind introduction. Thanks a lot also for the opportunity to be here on this special occasion, and which tells me how close the links have been over the years as well between myself and the Society for Experimental Biology and a tradition that has been involved with that. So I've been with the SCB certainly longer than with the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Now, what I will be talking to you about is, can we have the slides here also on the screen? Will be about the links between climate change and biodiversity, which have been in the background always part of the IPCC assessment reports to some extent, but then our younger, and I still say our, although I've left the IPCC about 1.5 years ago, our smaller sister has been founded, which is the governmental platform on biodiversity, the IPBES or IPBES, as it is called. And we have, during my tenure as co-chair of IPCC Working Group 2, have done the first official collaboration between the two organizations by producing a workshop report with the same title as the session today, Climate Change and Biodiversity, or Biodiversity and Climate Change, whatever you want to see first. And it brings together some important aspects that we have always been addressing in the context of the SEB, at least in the temperature group, trying to understand the impacts of temperature on animal life, their biogeography, their well-being, and so forth. But bringing this up to the higher level, to a systems understanding, like ecosystem understanding, is certainly an ongoing challenge. And some of the basics, the physiological findings that would explain these things are, to some extent, still a bit controversial. I will refer to this, but first of all, it's also linking to major concerns that have been evolving over the preparation of these assessment reports. And this is the number of assessment reports we have been producing in the 6th assessment cycle, which are the working group reports. IPCC has 3 working groups, and then we did the largest ever number of special reports during one cycle, one on climate change and land, one on climate change and the ocean, and one of a very important one shortly after the Paris Agreement, one on global warming of 1.5, comparing 1.5 and 2 degrees global warming with respect to their impact and what can be done. And then there are some other reports, and here is the workshop report, IPBES, IPCC workshop report on biodiversity and climate change that influenced our main assessment reports. And I'm also talking on behalf of the German Advisory Council on Global Change, where we also discuss the global aspects of these various issues and processes that are so important in shaping our life. And I would say that climate change, biodiversity loss, and certainly pollution to be added, are the existential threats to life on Earth, and we are 100% responsible. We also published the results of the workshop report in a review in Science in 2023. Now, what's happening? Temperature is increasing, and these figures from our synthesis report show how the globe will be developing in terms of warming. As you can see, the warming trend is higher over land than over the ocean. So the degrees of warming that are presented over land are usually larger numbers than the global average. That is important to know. And when we, at the time of the Paris Agreement, still thought that it is possible to keep global warming to 1.5, nowadays there's some skepticism that this actually can be done. Actually there is some skepticism of whether it will be able to keep global warming to 2 degrees. And that is in the most recent literature. And there is some increasing uncertainty about this. If you look at the last 2 years here, 2023 and 2024, the degree of global warming has been higher than has been evolving over the last few decades. There seem to be some changes in the climate system that are associated with the cloud cover, and it may well be that some of the modeling, in fact needs to be adjusted to these recent trends, and that climate change may be going faster than anticipated so far. Otherwise, the modeling has been very good at reflecting and projecting the degrees of global warming, and the next assessment report will be telling us to what extent these are exceptional trends or whether there's a change in the climate system behind. Another aspect to be considered is certainly the distribution of water. Temperature and water are the critical components shaping life on Earth, and there is a redistribution of precipitation zones, an intensification of the hydrological cycle. Water content in the atmosphere is increasing by 7% per degree Celsius. But together with the degree of warming, this means that not in every place we are going to see an increase in humidity as indicated here by the blue-green dots, but there are many areas, like especially to be emphasized here for us, the Mediterranean, where there will be water shortage in the future associated with risks for vegetation and also for human economy and human well-being together with the rise in temperature. Now, what is happening? And there are these are some simple flashlights in terms of telling us what is happening in the biosphere. It's certainly human activities are causing losses. There are overfished stocks and there's habitat destruction. Then there are excessive droughts happening during extreme events. There are heat waves happening, causing mortality in the natural world and among humans, unfortunately. And there are excessive wildfires, and we've seen some of those during the tenure of our IPCC, like in the sixth assessment cycle, like in Australia, and think of the recent ones in the Los Angeles area. So there's something wrong. Something is going into imbalance. And there is a strong imbalance between three interacting systems and human society. Our species are now one of the systems with global impact, causing some people to talk about the Anthropocene. So the Earth system and climate and ecosystems, they influence each other, and they define the basis of life for humans, for all life on the planet, and we are actually in our way influencing ecosystem properties through our activities. Now, this graph shows these issues, and the red arrows actually show the imbalances caused, human society causing climate change impacting the natural world, including biodiversity, and there are direct impacts by human society on these ecosystems. And these are the strong arrows here. The risks evolving from those activities are also indicated, and the strength of the arrow shows the predominant interactions. And then there are some narrow arrows which indicate that there could also be positive interactions. We are the ones to decide whether these positive interactions can be strengthened in the future, and we will get back to that. The consequence of this imbalance is climate change, biodiversity loss, land degradation, pollution, and so forth. Now, stepping back from these basic findings with respect to how the globe is changing, I will now, first of all, go a little bit into some basic understanding from the science of how actually the links between climate system and life, focusing on the ocean and life in the ocean, are actually to be understood. And this basic understanding is, I think, our mandate, developing a cause and effect understanding, and there's a strong role for experimental biology in this context. And when we work on marine creatures, everybody will immediately understand it's important to know where the creatures that we are working on are coming from, what their environmental conditions are. And this very rough picture shows that actually there is a difference in the temperature ranges depending on the latitude, and there's, most importantly, and sometimes ignored, there's a difference in temperature variability depending on the region where we take the creatures from that we are working on. So environmental variability is an important aspect. And this is also to be considered in the context of ocean acidification, a trend that has come into the focus from the increase in atmospheric CO2 and its entry into the ocean and the acidifying trends. And these acidifying trends are also prominent, most prominent in some areas characterized by upwelling on the western side of the continents. So the bluish areas here show how the deep water acidification is coming to the surface and then added, complemented by the anthropogenic influence, such that these influences become very strong in some places. And then there is a change also in oxygen content, and here you see the expanding oxygen minimum zones over time for the eastern tropical North Atlantic, and for the eastern equatorial Pacific Ocean. There's an expansion of these bluish zones over the years, and an intensification of the hypoxia in the center of those zones. And then there are many hypoxic areas evolving in coastal areas due to eutrophication by human activities. So all of this indicates there is variability in environmental conditions, which is naturally there, but it's emphasized under climate change, because warming, CO2 accumulation, and oxygen loss are characteristic climate change patterns in the ocean. And certainly we should also mention that light, nutrient distribution, and food availability can contribute to the environmental variability. Now, what do we have in terms of basic insight? How is biodiversity playing out in the ocean? What are the biodiversity patterns? And there's this overarching curve, which is valid for animal life mostly, and it shows that there is a biodiversity optimum close to the equator, and there is a decline of biodiversity towards polar areas on both sides. The Antarctic is a little bit special because it has diverse and highly endemic fauna. We will get back to this valley that is to be seen in the center on this side. Now, what we need to ask is, do we have a basic understanding of why this basic biodiversity pattern is the way it is? What is causing this distribution? And the sobering insight is we don't have actually much of an explanation currently. And we have the hypothesis certainly that temperature is an important part of the story, but we don't really have mechanism-based understanding how temperature underpins biodiversity distribution. Clearly, there's a future role for experimental biology. Now, what do we actually know in this context? And this shows for fish species a figure where actually across both hemispheres we have displaced the upper and the lower thermal limits. And you see how with changing latitudes there is a decline in upper thermal limits and a decline in lower thermal limits. The two go together to some extent, and there's also a decline in the preferred temperature where a species wants to be. Now, this is classic methodology, sort of lethal thermal limits or CT max determinations, which I think from a modern point of view can only be the very beginning of understanding what temperature means actually for life. There is an aspect that has become more prominent recently in terms of as a basic sort of pattern for understanding the specialization of life on temperature, and that is the temperature-dependent performance curve. With some thresholds and with a typical tilted curve, tilted to the right to some extent with a thermal optimum, and there are some physiological transition points indicated here where performance reductions and reductions of abundance or transition to anaerobic metabolism or heat stress and denaturation processes are part of visible thermal stress to an organism. But these performance curves certainly mean a lot at ecosystem level. They are important how species interact, how they compete, how they are able to behave. And an insight that is also emerging from the literature is that these curves are dynamic. CO2 and hypoxia can define and can co-define the width of these performance curves. A more recent insight into some general principles that are emerging here, at least for fish, from a meta-analysis on about 700 fish species from different environments, freshwater, marine. And And what we can see is actually the thermal window is changing over the lifetime of an individual. It starts quite narrow in the embryonic stage, it's widening towards larvae, juvenile adults, and then it's narrowing again towards the spawning stage. So that seems to be a general pattern for fish. There's still the question out to what extent this can be generalized for invertebrates as well. And there's another issue that seems to be there, is that there is a distinction between stenotherms and eurytherms. According to the width of thermal window, we have a wide thermal window associated with a higher metabolic cost, differing from a small thermal window for a stenotherm. And that seems to be a background of energy-saving strategies and evolutionary patterns and leading us to understand why in environments with small temperature fluctuations, it's beneficial to be a stenotherm, save the energy, but then at the expense of losing resilience to wider temperature fluctuations. And these patterns seem to hold also for the life stages. Here we have a comparative study for Atlantic cod and polar cod. You see the temperature window for the embryonic stage and which have the narrowest temperature. And you see in the reddish curve how an increase in ambient CO2 is actually squeezing that temperature range available. These kind of findings are then important and can be considered in biogeography modeling. In this case, we did some modeling exercises in terms of the spawning habitat and how that may be changing for these two species. And we see for, depending on the mean global warming temperatures indicated here, how actually the spawning habitat for Atlantic cod is moving further north. They're losing spawning habitat in the south along the coast of Norway, for example, where they have been spawning predominantly, and the same indicated by the reddish color is happening to the polar cod. It's pushed more and more into the Arctic, losing territory, and Atlantic cod is an invasive species in the Arctic Ocean, essentially. So some principal patterns are emerging here. Another aspect which is indicated in a simplified way here, that there may actually be lifestyle variability that is influencing thermal relationship. So exercising species like salmon, roaming species like cod, and sit and wait predators like an eelpout, they may also show different thermal windows related to their metabolic underpinnings, indicated here as a temperature-dependent change in routine metabolism within the limits of their thermal range. So routine metabolism relates to performance capacity. So there was a question, can we also provide some proof that this is actually something to be considered? And yes, there is. So by collaborating with some modelers, we were able to show that the routine metabolic scope is actually related to the southern distribution of Atlantic cod on the North American side as much as on the European side, indicated by the blue dots where this demersal species is to be found. So there is a relationship between the physiology, the biogeography, and the limitations, and certainly these patterns need to be used in the future more and more to understand species interactions, how they are changing, and how different life forms and their widths of thermal windows become important here. But let's go back to the ocean. The ocean is progressing to and transitioning to unprecedented conditions, depending on the changes in temperature, depending on the changes in oxygen and on surface pH. And we've been using in our assessments different climate scenarios. And this is, in a way, comparing the extreme. The bluish is the the below 2 degrees scenario, getting close to 1.5, but not quite so in the mean, and the reddish one is the business as usual, the traditional business as usual scenario, where we have unabated emissions causing stronger climate change. And the moment of truth, we are approaching that by mid-century, in 2040s, we will see the differentiation between how the different scenarios will actually be playing out and becoming different from each other. Until then, the difference between them is actually quite small. Now we have an increase in marine heat waves. It has taken some years to really apply the term heat wave to the ocean as well, and not just to things going on land. We have a mean decline in oxygen, which really all of these trends, and we have a decline in pH, and all of these trends depend on how fast it will be possible to reduce emissions. Now, how does ocean biology respond? And we have some projections again here and some findings that are indicating actually, yes, there is an impact to be expected for animal life at least, and you will see here species leaving the lowest latitudes, leaving the tropics, or going extinct in the tropics if they don't find another space to live. And this trend will be stronger in the future depending on the degree of global warming. This is 2.5, which is sort of in line or at the lower end of what the current nationally determined contributions will be taking us to, compared to 4.3. And the current drivers of change, I think, can reasonably be assumed to be the warming and the warming velocity causing shifting biogeographies, shifting species interactions and community composition, and interacting with oxygen loss and acidification, as we have seen earlier. But there's also a redistribution of nutrients. There are some desert areas evolving in the ocean, reduction of nutrient availability, and that plays out in the warming, especially in the stronger warming trends, as a decline, indicated by the purple color here, in the decline of change in marine fish biomass. So there is an overall change to the system that lead to these somewhat scary projections, certainly with implications for fisheries results. And then there is interaction between temperature and oxygen, and some of the overarching modeling shows that especially in those areas that are prone to developing stronger hypoxia according to the variability shown earlier, we see there that there is a decline in the metabolic index, sort of in the routine metabolic scope, and that this decline is quite significant. It can, sort of the global average would be 20%. In the high latitudes, it would be 40%, especially in the Pacific. And this contributes to the compression of distribution range, in the reduction in body size, and also likely to the reduction in diversity. And let's come back to this curve that we've seen before. Now this bump here in the center indicates and is in line, and these are observations for different time periods up to the more recent. And we see how this bump at the equator is reflecting, sort of surpassing the upper thermal limits of animal life in the ocean. Animals, in my view, are the most sensible and sensitive creatures due to their high complexity in relation to climate change. And we see the mountain building up sort of further north and further south in terms of indicating how species are sort of moving north and south under climate change. And these trends will be continuing according to the modeling results shown. So there's a loss of tropical habitat due to thermal stress setting in and it is setting in. We are not talking about something hypothetical happening in the future. Now, we've been taking this further in meta-analyses compiled in the last synthesis report for the IPCC. And there is a risk of species losses, and the areas here show how actually living conditions with respect to temperature, degrees of warming become unfavorable for animal life in the ocean, and the same on land. And among the thousands of species at risk, many are species of ecological, cultural, and economic importance. And we are just one of the species affected. If we do a similar analysis for humans and look at the temperature conditions where heat and humidity combine to unfavorable situations where temperature control for the body becomes very difficult, where the first thing is certainly the loss of performance for us as well. Doing outdoor work will be challenging, and we see how actually, depending on the degree of warming, areas on the planet, especially in the lower latitudes, become unfavorable for human activities outdoors, if not for human life. And I remind you that even in the UK, there during heat waves, during unexpected heat waves, there have been human mortalities because our health systems have not been traditionally adapted to handle these challenging conditions. So the future has also begun for us. There's a loss of human habitat, especially from the lower latitudes. And if we look at lifespan for humans in relation to the projections, and these are these famous temperature lines that convey the message of global warming very, very clearly and very nicely, comparing the different degrees of warming until end of the century, then we see that somebody born early this century is likely to experience the heat that is accumulating on planet Earth, and there's no end to this visible at the moment that this process can be stopped altogether. But clearly, for us as biologists, it's important to see that it is not just about us. There are other species that have also long lifespans, and they're also living up to these conditions. So we can see immediately that individuals born today there will also be affected, and this is the background of the ecosystem changes. So it's coming close. It's not just something speculative for the future anymore. Now, how do we sort of qualify the changes? And let me go back to the natural systems in this context. And we have a risk concept that I think is very useful to relate what is happening in the different systems and sectors with respect to the different degrees of warming. We look at the hazard, which is the climate hazard. We look at the exposure and the vulnerability of the system. And from this overlap, we can define the level of risk. There are limits to adaptation to be considered for the natural system as much as for the human system. There can be physical, ecological, technological, economic, political, institutional, psychological, and or social-cultural. And so it's a very complex analysis that needs to be undertaken. And we need to consider the capacity for risk reduction by adaptation and mitigation. And we do that, and as it is the case for such a complex system, we are using a color scale to reflect such changes. And we are saying risk is undetectable in a white range, moderate in a yellow, red it's high, and purple it's very high. And for each of these risk categories, we are developing a narrative in terms of what is changing in the system concerned and which changes we consider. There's certainly a judgment process involved as unacceptable. And there is a confidence level for the temperature transition to be considered in that risk. And here we see for the natural systems, the land-based systems and the ocean and coastal systems, how these risk levels play out. There is one important system, the warm water corals, which are very much on a decline already, and where the projections are pretty dim. We are in a high to very high risk arena already. We have the current temperature here, and this is the 1.5 degree temperature line that we have just surpassed during the last 2 years, and the projections are we will see a 70 to 90% decline in coral cover by 1.5 and up to 99 by 2 degrees global warming. For other systems, it's less grim, and here it plays out that the ocean warming is lagging behind terrestrial warming. There's a safety margin to some extent for kelp, seagrass, for the epipelagic, for rocky shores, and for salt marshes. Whereas on land, for all of the systems looked at and the processes looked at for wildfire, permafrost degradation, biodiversity loss, dryland, water scarcity, tree mortality, carbon loss, the risk threshold from medium to high is actually very close to the 1.5 degree temperature line. No wonder that after Paris and after our special report on 1.5, people keep talking about the 1.5, but at the same time, the action is not matching what the desire is. So what we need to be doing, and that's actually taking us to the solution realm. Emissions reduction is the most important overarching necessity. And it's part, but it's not happening by itself. It's part of the stopping of global megatrends by transitions in the human systems concerning energy, industry, infrastructure, transport, lifestyle, and society. It is also including transitions in ecosystems, ecosystem stewardship. We need to take care of those ecosystems, and it involves climate stabilization. It involves strengthening those positive interactions of adaptation and mitigation efforts on both sides, human systems and ecosystems, and it also needs conservation and restoration efforts by human society for ecosystems. Actions need to be urgent and timely, and we have already lost too much time by not doing enough. And we have made proposals for the spatial planning that needs to be done. We have, in line with the decision to protect 30% of the planet's surface for biodiversity, and we have made a suggestion for spatial planning by suggesting a mosaic approach to this, where highly protected areas neighbor more intensively used spaces or neighbored spaces with different degrees of intensity in their uses, and that is both for the land and the ocean. And there are migration corridors that allow species to migrate. And this holistic approach, considering biodiversity needs, human needs, would nicely fit under the concept of planetary health that is currently emerging as one, combining human health, ecosystem health, and planetary health approaches in their strategy to be implemented. There are some aspects, some preconditions to be considered. The spatial planning and implementation is very important. There needs to be conservation and stabilization of carbon-rich habitats with enhanced carbon storage. Adaptation limits are very important to be considered. There needs to be a net gain in biodiversity, no longer just, compensating for what you destroy here and building something to the same extent here. We need to be bending the curve. We need to gain area for land in order to be able to implement protection measures, and reduced meat and milk production will help us to free area for agroforestry, woodland pasture, and so forth. And we certainly need to integrate human interests in terms of adaptation, livelihoods, and health approaches. Something that came out of the analysis very nicely actually is that if we have a focus just on climate action, it could be harmful for biodiversity. So there are these orange lines indicating that in many of the actions with respect to biodiversity, there could be harmful implementation. The current discussion of reducing bureaucracy, which all of us would agree on, if it means that we reduce environmental impact assessments, that could actually lead to such a situation. Whereas when we go from the side of biodiversity actions, the number of negative implementations for climate actions are much less. And time is running. If we look at the natural systems that are actually helping us to mitigate climate change, then we see that already in our present climate, we see a decline in the capacity of natural ecosystems to store carbon. And until 2040, so relatively close, under unabated climate change, these trends are exacerbating. And if we do such an analysis across latitudes, we see that capacity, according to the blue line, declining and following more the orange line. So we are actually, through climate change, reducing the capacity of natural systems to store carbon and help us mitigate in the long run. We are harming the systems that we need so much in the long term to stabilize our climate systems. And that certainly is another call for action, for immediate action in that context. Because as we have said in the Science Advisory Council, there is a room for maneuverability that needs to be protected. But there is time, as time goes on, with unabated or insufficiently reduced emissions, this room for action is reducing. We can adapt, yes, but even then we will lose room for action, room for maneuver. And we need to limit the direct drivers of biodiversity loss through ambitious climate policy. We need to increase adaptability for society and biodiversity. And this is coming close. We need to have a plan B. We may need to generate replacement habitats for species, but also for ourselves, if you think of the low-lying coasts and the small island development states that are subjected to the threat of sea level rise, and also the lower latitudes with respect to exposure to extreme heat. Let me summarize. The science is clear. Any further delay in concerted global action will miss a brief and rapidly closing window to secure a livable future for all. IPCC and other reports offer solutions. However, very clearly, implementation is getting late. And with that, thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Hans. It's really difficult to listen to these terrifying projections, but of course very important that we face up to them. So thank you so much for all the work that you do. We're going to take questions for Hans at the end of Jane's talk, so please hold on to your questions or submit them into Slido. And we will have a panel discussion after the next talk. So now it's my very great pleasure to introduce Professor Dame Jane Francis. Jane is a paleoclimatologist who explores past biodiversity and climate through the study of fossil plants. She's the director of the British Antarctic Survey and the Chancellor of the University of Leeds. So amongst many other honours, she was awarded the Polar Medal for her contributions to British polar research, which recognise the insights that have emerged from her really intrepid fieldwork in extreme environments. And her work really showcases the importance of Antarctic research and fossil plant research for understanding how changing climates can affect our planet. So thank you so much for joining us today, Jane, and we look forward to your talk.
Thank you very much. Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be here, and it's an amazing pleasure to listen to Hans talk. A bit scary, but I completely agree, and my message after Hans's talk is go away and read IPCC because it contains the most important information. I'm going to take you back in time. I'm a geologist by training, and so I deal with timescales of millions of years, not human years, and I'm going to take you back to a world where there were no humans. So this is dealing with a longer time span and a natural Earth. And what I'm going to do is take you back to Antarctica to show you Antarctica millions of years ago and what our Earth was like, or at least Antarctica was like when the Earth was much warmer, but also then bring you up to date, particularly about Antarctica, because it is a special place and it does affect you even though you're sitting here. So let's go to Antarctica, a beautiful place now. We all know it is a frozen planet with spectacular scenery. But actually, for most of its history, Antarctica has had a warm climate, depending on where tectonically as a plate it sat in the world. I'm going to deal with 100 million years ago. There were lush forests in Antarctica. When I did this research some years ago, it was a bit considered to be not relevant to today, but oh boy, is it now. So it may provide a window into our future warm world. So here's Antarctica, the big continent over the South Pole, covered in ice. But actually, this is a NASA satellite image, but actually there's quite a lot of rock exposed, so that's why I do fieldwork there. And you can see the tops of mountains stick up, they're nunataks. And some of the coastal regions, the coastal sea cliffs, have rocks exposed, and particularly the Antarctic Peninsula that's labelled there, which is the bit that sticks up towards Chile and South America, that is very rich in plant fossils. And actually, most of the rocks that are exposed, although it's a very small percentage, less than 1%, most of those rocks were formed on land in terrestrial conditions millions of years ago, and they contain plant fossils like this spectacular one here. Now, it's really important to be able to understand where Antarctica was at that time. So this is what's called a paleogeography map that geologists put together for the past so they can understand the rock record and place the continents where they were 100 million years ago. So 100 million years ago is the time of the dinosaurs. If you watch Jurassic Park movies, that's about 150 million years ago. I'm going slightly younger, 100 million years ago. It's called the Cretaceous period geologically, and at the end of the Cretaceous, the dinosaurs died out. So it is sort of an ancient world. But you can see from there, you can see the shapes of the continents, you can see there's South America, there's Africa, you can just about see North America, Asia, Europe. What is most important to realise is that Antarctica, 100 million years ago, as a continent, as a tectonic plate, moved over the South Pole, and that's where it has sat for the last 100 million years. It's not moved, it's really static. And that's really important because it means that when we see a signal of change, climate change in Antarctica, it's not because the continent has moved latitudes, which some people think, that it actually is a proper climate record. You can also see that Antarctica was attached at this point to Australia. It was actually attached to South America, forming a landmass called Gondwana. But Africa had released itself from Gondwana, and India was in a process of rapidly zooming up across the Indian Ocean to hit Asia and to form the Himalayas. So we know, because we find fossil plants in Antarctica that I'll show you, that Antarctica was over the South Pole, and the South Pole had a warm climate, probably due to high CO2 levels due to natural volcanic eruptions. So I'm going to take you to Antarctica because why not? It's a fantastic place, and I've enjoyed working there. So the peninsula looks a bit like this. You go to Antarctica in the summer months, so January, February time when it's warmer. It's above freezing sometimes. And there is fantastic exposure of rocks, so there are these sort of islands, particularly around this northern part, which have no ice cover, they have no grass, they have no buildings, they have nothing obscuring the rocks, so it's a geologist's paradise to work in. Except when it snows, which it does every now and then, So here's my field camp, 2-man tent. So there's me and my field assistant in there on a snowy day when geologists have a day off. And we play cards and eat chocolate and listen to music and sleep. But on a good day, it's fantastic. We find a lot of fossils. So this is a kind of area that I've worked in. Right at the top there, you can see possibly a little orange splodge, which is my camp, several tents. And we look at sediments like this of Cretaceous age, 100 million years and a bit younger, and we find fossils that tell us about past climate conditions or past environmental conditions. This sequence of rocks actually was buried slightly offshore an ancient landscape, and so these are shallow waters, and we find an amazing array of fossils in there that indicate what the marine environment was like. So we've got ammonites. They went extinct, like a kind of a squid-like animal that was encased in a round shell that went extinct at the end of the Cretaceous. We have different types of gastropods, different types of snails. There are lots of bivalves and different creatures that lived in the bottom of the ocean. And I've worked with artists to bring this to life. So all my research group, we've worked with these artists to paint pictures. And this particular artist is called Robert Nichols. He's an expert at painting dinosaurs and ancient conditions. So this was probably what Antarctic oceans looked like on the peninsula about, well, let's say 70 million years ago. It's before the dinosaurs died out. So we have the whole skeletons of this giant beast called a mosasaur, which is about the size of a double-decker bus. And that went extinct later. There are plesiosaurs, again, marine reptiles, primitive sharks. There are these ammonites in the ocean. There's a huge array of creatures living in the ocean floor, and there's even birds. So we have real birds, ducks, in Antarctica at the time of the dinosaurs. Oh, and you can see that in the background there are mountains. We know there were mountain chains, and we know there are forests on them. So they're kind of like the Andes in Antarctica at that time. And the fossil plant record is quite amazing from here. We have fossil wood, which tells us a bit about the type of wood and the trees and the tree rings. We have fossil plants. Although the leaves we have are impressions mostly, unfortunately we don't have the cuticle of the fossil leaf, which you can find in some places. So we don't see the stomata and we can't do climate analysis from the stomata. And we have spectacular collections of pollen and spores from these sediments as well. So we do have a picture of the whole vegetation. And fossil wood is particularly something that I've worked on. So we have wood of large forest trees. They're not small trees, they're large forest trees. They lived in those forests on the mountain chains. They floated out to sea. They sank into the muds of the ocean, and over millions of years, permineralizing solutions, mineral solutions, flowed through the sediments into the fossil wood, which acts like a kind of sponge. And over millions of years, that has crystallized and petrified the wood. So although that looks like a piece of, that's about a meter long piece of board with a rusty nail in it, that actually is a piece of petrified wood that has all the details of the cellular details of the wood preserved. And you can see this microscope thin section made of that wood. You can see how beautifully preserved the tree rings are. And so you can do dendroclimatology on the tree rings just like you do tree ring research on modern trees, and you can see all the individual rings, and all the wood that I've looked at from Antarctica has beautiful rings. They're very even. They show that there was no frost, there was no drought, and the trees loved living in Antarctica. We have impressions of the leaves. So we have, here's one example we have a tree fern, very, very similar. The leaves are very, very similar in our fossils to the modern tree fern that lives in New Zealand, Nixonia antarctica. Of course, I'm dealing with southern hemisphere vegetation here, which is very different to the northern hemisphere vegetation. We also have monkey puzzle trees, Araucaria. So we have this, on the left there, there are a nodule about 20 centimetres long, and in it you can see the woody stem, woody branch of monkey puzzle. Where's my arrow gone? And you can see the leaves coming off the side still attached. That's because, if you know monkey puzzle, they're very waxy, very hard, and they maintain their shape and their form joined together in the fossil record. And you can see here on the right-hand side, this is a picture of the Araucaria, the monkey puzzle forests in the high Andes. If you ever go on a holiday, a spectacular place is the volcanic district in Chile in the high Andes. And there are some spectacular national parks with active volcanoes, surrounded by monkey puzzle forests, with Southern Beach in the undergrowth. And it's just like being back in a dinosaur forest. It's truly amazing. And probably our Antarctic Peninsula volcanic region looked just like this, with monkey puzzle trees growing on the high mountains. So this is probably the most detailed reconstruction of what the forests were like in Antarctica, between 65 and 70 degrees south at that time, 100 million years ago. And this painting, again by Rob Nichols, was the result particularly of a PhD student who mapped a whole bed of rock in which there were tree stumps preserved, petrified tree stumps preserved in place. And there were also rootlets, petrified rootlets of plants, smaller plants, and there were leaves also preserved in fossil soils. A very spectacular and special location. So she measured the distances between all of the different fossils, and this is about as accurate you'll get of a picture of an Antarctic forest 100 million years ago. So you can see in the background we've got erupting volcanoes, because we know that occasionally these forests were covered in catastrophic ash falls and floods. And the position of the trees is how the trees grew. So here's a tree, we have the wood of ginkgo, and here ginkgo leaves, we have them as fossils, very common as fossils. There's a ginkgo tree. This is a podocarp conifer, so we have the wood and leaves of podocarps, southern hemisphere common conifers. Monkey puzzle trees were quite common. We have tree ferns in this forest as well. We have normal ferns, and we have some plants which we don't have a modern living relative. They are only found in the fossil record and went extinct, so this is a reconstruction of those. We also have liverworts and mosses preserved. What we don't have 100 million years ago is angiosperms, flowering plants. They hadn't quite got to Antarctica in abundance. There's the odd one or two fossils, but this is mostly a fern and conifer, tree fern forest. When we put this picture together, I asked the artist to put some eyes in the undergrowth here in the dark, because we'd not ever found bones here, because it's really quite it was an acid environment, and these fossils are preserved almost in a acid coal-like formation, rock formation. But when he brought the picture, he said, "Yes, I have. I put a fossil in here for you, an animal in here for you that you need to go and find the fossils of." So, can you find it? This is great for school kids when I give this talk. Can you see the dinosaur? There he is here, behind this tree. So the irony is that, this is, Rob Nichols, the artist, is a specialist in dinosaurs, so he knew what he was doing when he put this small dinosaur behind this tree, camouflaged, in challenging us to go and find it. This is a small, about 3 metre long, herbivorous, vegetarian dinosaur. They lived in Australia at the same time in herds. We know that from the fossil remains. And we've actually found the remains of dinosaurs of this type, not quite in this forest, but a bit further north on the peninsula. So we know that there were dinosaurs probably living in these forests at that time. Now, not surprisingly, there were also fires. There were fires on these forests. I mean, it was a volcanic arc. It was active. We know there were eruptions from the rock record. And preserving plants as charcoal is quite fantastic because charcoal doesn't decay. It's very brittle and you can crush it, but if the charcoal is washed into sort of a muddy environment in the past and then preserved, you find the most amazing fossils. And they don't decay, except crushed, they don't rot, they don't are attacked by any kind of mineralization generally. And so we have some spectacular SEM images of a whole range of fossil plants. I'll just show you one. I had a postdoc, Helena Eklund, who's specialist on these sort of 1 millimeter mesofossils. And just one here. So this on the left-hand side is an SEM picture of one of these small charcoalified fossils that you can see is a kind of vase-like structure with a cap on it, which Helena clearly identified as a relation of the modern sort of eucalyptus families, because with the same kind of distinctive structure. So we have something that is like a very early Myrtaceae, or very early type of eucalyptus. But we have a lot of the Australian flora preserved as charcoal. And many of the plants that we do find in the fossil record are ancestors of the current southern hemisphere vegetation. So we have on the left-hand side the modern Nothofagus, or southern beech. It's like beech, but it's very distinctively lives in the southern hemisphere. And we have this type here, 2 centimeter long leaf. We have Proteaceae. Bothrium from Chile is very similar, and we have Proteaceae leaves from Antarctica 100 million years ago, 70 million years ago. We have this kite-shaped leaf, which is very similar to Brachychitum, which lives in the more tropical regions of the southern hemisphere in Queensland and New Zealand. So we have the early ancestors of southern hemisphere vegetation. And just going a little bit younger, 70 million years, still in the Cretaceous, then we do have dinosaurs, and my American and Argentine colleagues work on the dinosaurs. So we did have a real diverse population there. There are these sauropods, the herbivorous sauropods. We see their footprints, the big footprints. We see hadrosaur bones, the dinosaurs that make a sort of trumpeting noise. We have stegosaurs. We have the avian dinosaurs. So these are dinosaurs that didn't die out at the end of the Cretaceous. They continued on and evolved into types of birds. And then we actually do have birds. We have ducks. We have clear duck fossils in Antarctica that are the ancient stem lineage of many of the modern birds. So in this picture, which is a bit younger, we've got these sort of Andean-like mountains, which we know were there. We've got monkey puzzle trees in the mountains. We have southern beech growing in the lowlands. There's some red there, the Proteaceae were there. Angiosperms had appeared by 70 million years in Antarctica. We had the southern beech, angiosperm, and Proteaceae, so we did have flowers around by that time. Dinosaurs died out. We still have some really great fossils of younger sediments, and so this is some work by American scientists from the American Museum of Natural History, and we lose some of the, of course we've lost all the dinosaurs, and the animals changed completely as they do over the rest of the globe, and we have marsupial possum-like creatures preserved in the Eocene 50 million years ago. We have these carnivorous birds. We find the fossil skeletons of carnivorous birds. We have these early ungulates. I like to think of them as precursors of llamas, but they're called Gondwanatheres. But the vegetation is the same. So when you read about meteorite impact killing off the dinosaurs and destroying all the vegetation, it certainly didn't happen in Antarctica. So here we have Nothofagus, southern beech. We have lots of monkey puzzle trees. We have Winteraceae. This is a flower we also find in the Cretaceous. And we have a lot more. And another story is these little black things on the beach, they're penguins. Penguins evolved in warm climates of Antarctica, not on the ice. That's another story. Now, after all that warmth, Antarctica did become cold, and I'm talking about millions of years. And about 40 million years ago, we see the first sign of ice in Antarctica. That's quite a decent amount of geological time ago. And what happened was that the tectonics changed. Australia and South America, as tectonic blocks moved away from Antarctica. And for the first time, the ocean currents flowed around Antarctica, forming this big Antarctic circumpolar current, which we see today, which makes sailing to Antarctica a nightmare if you suffer from seasickness like I do. Really rough waters, particularly here in the Drake Passage around South America and Antarctica, but this cold current flows around Antarctica, and it kind of isolated Antarctica at the bottom of the Earth in a really icy tomb. And at the same time, through natural, we think it was natural geological processes, carbon dioxide was decreasing and the Earth was becoming much colder. But there are still plants in Antarctica, so quite amazingly, and in fact this is quite close to the South Pole, just a few hundred miles from the South Pole. This is the Beardmore Glacier, if you're into Antarctic history, where Scott went and his team went towards the South Pole to find that Amazon had got there first. And, but some of these rocks here contain these tiny little fossil leaves. Again, you recognise these as southern beech. They were only found sort of a few years ago in the 80s, 90s, when people were looking for something else, and they discovered these little plants. And so the forest survived through the early stages of glaciation. A pretty cold place to work, but there are these tiny, tiny little twigs here that I'm holding. That tiny twig has 100 growth rings in it. So these are dwarf bushes. They're dwarf bushes like dwarf willow that grows in the Arctic, if you've seen those. But these are of southern beech. And we also find these sheets of leaves that look like autumnal deposits, but they are sheets of leaves within kind of ponds between the glacier deposits, the glacier rock deposits. So we have evidence of tundra conditions in Antarctica about 5 to 10 million years ago. And this is probably what Antarctica looked like. This is the high mountains of Tasmania, which don't have glaciers so much, but they're very cold. Mean annual temperatures 3 to 5 degrees. And we're looking at now probably tundra-like environments in Antarctica at that time. So this is showing climate change over a long period from 100 million years when it was globally warm, and there probably were very minor or no ice sheets on Antarctica, to then developing a tundra environment in the Antarctic. And the Earth continued to cool, and then it's about 5 million years ago, which what I call the ice house set in, which is when the cold really took over the planet. The carbon dioxide had really decreased drastically, and large ice sheets grew in Antarctica way beyond the continent of Antarctica now. They went right out onto what we call the continental shelf, out into the ocean. And this is the time when the Arctic also froze. So the Arctic has remained warm geologically for a very long time, and Greenland ice is only about 5 to 8 million years old. So the Arctic is a very young glacial environment compared to the Antarctic. And so then we get to this real ice age world that we now know. So why should you care about Antarctica? I've talked about millions of years of global change, and for a very long time, until about 2 years ago, when we were talking about Antarctic change at the British Antarctic Survey, or the whole Antarctic community, there was generally this feeling that Antarctica was such a big continent, it's twice the size of Australia. It has ice sheets on it that are up to 5 kilometres thick. There's huge amounts of ice on Antarctica, 90% of the world's ice, 70% of the world's fresh water trapped in that ice. But we use the word inertia. We thought this was so big, so cold, that the man-made climate warming was not going to affect Antarctica. And we were so wrong. In the last 2 or 3 years, we have seen Antarctica change, and we have seen signs that global warming is affecting Antarctica. And although it's remote, although it's, the end of the Earth, it is affecting everything all the Earth systems that influence our climate and will influence you sitting here. If all the ice melted on Antarctica, global sea levels would rise by 60 metres. There will be no more Liverpool. There'll be no more Cambridge, which is our base in the UK. There'll be, I'm going to go and live in Leeds or the Pennines if this happens, because this is about the only spine that's going to be left in the UK. So huge areas will melt. So what we're seeing, actually, are changes in Antarctica. And most of the Antarctic research that goes on is looking at how climate change is affecting Antarctica today, affecting particularly the ice and the oceans and the creatures that live, particularly in the oceans. And we're particularly worried about the ice shelves. So here's Antarctica today. This is our station down here at Rothera, in the ice house. One major question that we ask is, how is the climate warming affecting Antarctic ice sheets, where all that water is trapped that will influence the global sea level rise and ocean circulation. This is my favourite map to show you about this. This is a NASA image, again, satellite image, but what it shows is actually a different way of projecting the ice. So those tree-like structures on there are actually the ice streams. So this is the ice, the glacial land ice, that is flowing down from the ice cap towards the edge of the continent. And you can see that they flow into those purple zones, which are the ice shelves. So when the ice flows off the land, it then floats onto the ocean for a certain extent until it gets too heavy, and then it breaks off into big icebergs, into big tabular icebergs, which we've seen more and more floating around at the moment. But these ice shelves have an important role to play in that they act as buttresses or doorstops to keep the land ice on Antarctica. And the real issue is that if all of these ice shelves break up, if they're melting, if they break up, then all of this land ice will flow into the ocean much faster, and sea levels will rise. And we're already beginning to see this, where we see some of the ice shelves have broken up along some places in Antarctica. We have seen that the land ice has increased in speed and is flowing into the ocean. Antarctic ocean is absolutely critical. The ice and the ocean interaction affects the whole of our ocean circulation, because this cold, dense water that comes off of Antarctica flows right off the edge of the Antarctic continent, and then it flows fast and deep right across the equator in the bottom of the ocean system, right towards the Arctic, and then it flows back again, and it drives what we call a thermohaline circulation in the oceans. So that affects our climate, that affects ocean circulation, it affects so many properties of our climate globally. So changes to the ocean are now quite worrying, and we're seeing that some of that water is freshening that comes off of Antarctica, so it's lighter and it may lose its drive and our oceans may change. And that's where it's interesting to go back to the Cretaceous to understand what our oceans might look like in the future. So we're interested in the ice shelves because they are protecting the land ice. I'm just going to show you something that shows you the kind of scale at which we work at in Antarctica. So this is a big international project. This was funded by NERC UK and NSF UK, but there were lots of other countries involved. There was Germany, Korea, Sweden, and many others. So we attack it from all sides, with the ships, with aircraft, with satellites, with camps, drilling. And what we really, this is almost finished now, but we know is that the warming effect, global warming across the planet, has strengthened the winds around Antarctica. The winds are blowing warmer water up underneath the ice shelves, and the ice shelves are melting from below. So it's not intuitive from the top, it's from below. And we've sent down these autonomous vehicles underneath, and they've shown that the melting is happening underneath the ice shelves. So we're keeping a big watch on that and trying to understand what's going on there. There is also some melting on the top, and we're seeing in the last couple of years these amazing what we call atmospheric rivers of heat that flow from the tropics, and they flow across the center of Antarctica, across the top of the ice shelf, ice sheet, into the center of Antarctica, where the temperature is normally about sort of minus 50 or something like that in the winter. And it's raising the temperature there in a very short, days, weeks, by 30 or 40 degrees, which is a staggering amount of heat that's coming in. It's still below freezing. It's about minus 10 instead of minus 50. But at the continental edge, that heat coming in is melting a lot of the Antarctic coastline. And that is really quite scary. The other thing that's happening is the sea ice that freezes around Antarctica in the winter is not freezing so much. It usually doubles the size of the continent. It acts as a big white blanket that reflects the heat and keeps Antarctica cold, and that is beginning to break down. So things are changing. Just one more way that we're looking at the climate, why looking in the past is so important, is to look for the ice sheet history. So here's some colleagues of mine. They're drilling into the ice sheet kilometers deep to try and understand the history of how the ice built up and what it means in terms of what it meant in terms of past climate. So you can see here they drill an ice core. There's part of an ice core just there. It's chopped up into meter lengths, packed in these isolated boxes. There's the results I'll show you from a project that happened in the past, which goes from 0 to 800,000 years of history. At the moment, there's a project that's trying to get back to 1.2 million years of history, and the ice is about to arrive in Cambridge any day now for interpretation. So when the glaciologists chop up the ice, they see these slabs with these small bubbles in, and they're really important. So you can see here frozen ice, they've dated these slabs, and here are tiny bubbles. In those bubbles is the atmosphere hundreds of thousands of years ago. It's the only source of ancient air on Earth. It's not a proxy, it's a real capsule, time capsule of ancient atmosphere. So what the scientists do is they measure the temperature of the ice, which they can do from oxygen isotopes, and that will reconstruct the temperature, and then they measure the carbon dioxide in the ancient atmosphere. And they get this very famous curve called the hockey stick curve. So it goes from 0 to 800,000 years from ice core measurements. They measure the temperature from isotopes, and they measure the CO2 from the gas bubbles. You can see they go up and down in tune. This is due to solar influence. But the most important thing to take away from this is that during our Ice Age Earth, and Homo sapiens came on Earth about 300,000 years ago, so we are creatures of the Ice Age. We are people of the Ice Age and have never known a world without ice. The CO2 concentration has never, ever gone above 300 parts per million while there has been the Ice Age on Earth. But look where we are now. From Industrial Revolution times, when we started burning coal, we are now, yesterday, we were 429 parts per million and exponentially rising. And Hans said, we're in a warming world that's out of control almost, and we do need to take control of it because we are now going into very high numbers of carbon dioxide. If you want to try and work that out, it's about 3 parts per million a year and increasing. And so by 2050, you can say there'll be approximately 500 parts per million CO2. We need to go back several million years now into the geological record to understand what the Earth will be like at that time. And you can ask me that as a question if you like. I'm going to finish with one. I love climate graphics. This is called the climate spiral. It's on the NASA website, climate spiral, and it shows, let's go, the temperature increase above the norm for up to I can't remember the exact time span, for every month and every year as it goes through. And you can see that we're coming very close to a temperature rise, a global temperature rise of +1. This is based on Ed Hawkins' University of Reading group. And you see we're now above +1, and it makes this amazing vase-like shape. The most incredible thing about this, though, that scares me is you can see that from 1880 until about 1970, the temperature was about 1 degree above, or it was close to norm, if you like, and then we started to change and we went above 1 degree. But look at the curve at the top, look at that red zone. It really is rising exponentially, and it doesn't take much to imagine where we're going if we don't do something about this. So I echo Hans's caution about we have to do something really radically and really quickly. But I think we need to be able to tell people that they have to adapt to a changing world, and we need to use all the scientific evidence that we've got to make better forecasts of the future, so that we can give them a picture of where we're going, so that when we tell them they have to adapt, when we all have to adapt, we know what we have to adapt to. Thank you very much.
So thank you so much to both of you. Illuminating, terrifying, and very interesting. Oh, I need to get the Slido for the questions. So please submit your questions to Slido. If anybody would like to stand up and ask a question, you're also welcome to do that. And we have maybe 5 or 10 minutes to take questions. So, the most popular question so far, a very important one. How do we get people on board who are unresponsive and in denial towards these urgent and timely actions, and yet these are the people who have all the power? So Hans, would you like to...
Okay. Yeah, thanks a lot. That is the key question of our time, is overcoming the inertia among policymakers and among society, and not allow individuals to take as much control as they are currently taking. I think it's a hard task, and we have been discussing this, that all our outreach that we've been doing, and IPCC outreach is getting the largest feedback among all UN activities each time a report is released, and still people are not listening. And if we see policymakers in our European countries, the more conservative they are, the more resilient they are with respect to the information, which is kind of contradictory, because I mean, what we are talking about is we want to be conservative with respect to the world that we know, and we want to keep it. So I think it needs to be starting from scratch. We need to be changing our education systems. We need to implement these essential topics. The life-sustaining functioning of our planet need to be cost-cutting topics in all disciplines, in a way, at school, at university, and so forth. We need to build a new generation of policymakers, and as long as we don't have that, we are reliant on our media activities. We need to join the outreach. Not everybody has to do it, not everybody is able to do it, but we can all join forces, and then strong individuals need to be speaking out to the public, and need to be giving them the warning. And there's one learning that I have went through during my activities. Repetition is important. We as scientists always are looking out for the new information, but we need to say what are our like on a yearly basis, our Christmas messages for climate change, our Easter messages for climate change. So we need to do a constant exposure of society to the relevant information. I think that is the way this works. Maybe we will pass a societal tipping point at some point where nobody can resist anymore, and we can work for a better future then.
Do you have anything to add, Jane?
No, I mean, usually humans are terrible. They wait for a catastrophe before they do something. But I have hope, because I think the new generation of young children are told in school, and you hear a lot of them are environmentalists, and they know what the plan is. They know what to do. If you look at that climate vase, it's really interesting. I call it the vase that I showed you on that graphic. Anybody born in the sort of 40s, 50s, 60s will have had a lifespan where they don't see climate change. And it's only in that red bit at the top, I think, where people born in the 80s onwards will have seen climate change. And so I think there's hope in future generations. But of course, all our politicians are not in there, are they? And, you know, some of the state of the world at the moment is horrific in the US, but I hope there are some other countries that are going to act sooner. And we all need to act now. We all need to do it for our own personal behaviour.
Thank you. So there's another very important and very popular question around carbon capture. So if I understand correctly, some of the projections that have been made assume that technologies such as carbon capture will come into being. We don't know if that's the case. So can you comment? Will technology save us?
So carbon capture and burial is a geological thing, putting the carbon dioxide back in the ground. There are some schemes doing this, particularly, so there's one in Iceland, which is called Carbfix, where they are putting carbon dioxide back and turning it into crystals, into rock, which actually seals it for millions of years. The trouble is the scale. We can't do it fast enough, and we can't do it of the right scale to be able to do that. There's a huge amount of talk in geoengineering about doing all sorts of weird and wacky things, like putting curtains around Antarctica to stop that warm water getting into the ice sheets, which is never going to happen. But I don't think we are developing a technology fast enough. That's a frustrating thing for me.
Yeah, and the scale. Some of this is scary. If I think of the carbon dioxide removal approaches, CDR approaches, for example, alkalizing the ocean for enhanced CO2 uptake, and if you do that large scale, that means global scale. That's scary because we have no understanding what this does to the ecosystems, and it's certainly not going to be benign. I mean, the carbon capture and storage, the CCS approaches, that was kind of my first task in the IPCC, in a special report on that, has really left the geological storage as the only option, and countries are opening up. The Netherlands is opening up, Germany is opening up in terms of possibilities there to store CO2 in aquifers under the North Sea, like the Norwegians are already doing and have been doing it for decades. And this may be an option for hard to abate sectors of industry in terms of helping them to reduce emissions. So we shouldn't close the door on that. I don't think CCS by really carbon CO2 removal from the air capture and storage is going to reach the scale as Jane has indicated as well.
Thank you. And maybe just one final question, which we'll keep brief, because I know that you will want a coffee. Now, we're all scientists. Most of us aren't climate scientists, but I think many of us wonder whether, as scientists, there's something we can do to use our scientific training to contribute to, spreading the word about climate change. So can you advise us on what we should all be doing? Do you want to go first?
Just go out there, give talks, lots of talks, educate young school children at schools, educate everybody in the community, talk about it, use the media, just keep on doing it, but also keep on doing good science that really brings new data, because I do think we have to adapt. I think mitigation is no longer a word, it's adaptation. How do you ask the public to adapt to something they don't know about? So we need to have better data. Data will inform models. Models will make better forecasts of the future, which will be able to tell us what our future will look like, will help policymakers then say, this is where we have to go.
Yeah, thank you. And make this part of your teaching efforts at university, because there may be aspects in your teaching, in your curriculum, where you can include these topics and make students aware, because I think that is part of the process and would be very, very helpful. And it's very clear that, like our generation, we had the benefit of doing our basic research and accumulating our data and understanding, and now we are building on all of this knowledge and trying to develop a picture for a better world. Current and future generations at universities will need to do all of this at the same time. And pushing for action, I think, needs to be an important part of it. So taking action and doing research at the same time, I think that will be the future for us.
So thank you so much. I hope this is a conversation that can continue. You know, please come to the lunchtime session today to continue discussing these incredibly important things. We return back at 11 o'clock. I just want to encourage everyone. This conference gives you, an unusual opportunity to go to talks outside your field, so please take advantage of that. And thank you once again for this very important and very interesting opening session.